I know that everybody here has an interest in history and this topic in particular. I know that many of you may not have been taught any or substantial history about yourself, Tobago, the Caribbean, during your school time, judging some of the ages I'm seeing. I wish to say that the issue of enslavement did not die in 1834 or 1838. Its impact remains with us today. Despite the negatives, however, the people and their descendants, and the people who were enslaved and their descendants, managed to express positive developments, particularly in the area of culture. And so, at this point, we have a pan presentation by Mr. Delbert Henry, one of our excellent soloists, recording artists, member of various organizations related to the steel pan, National Steel Band Music Festival winner for several years, involved and participant in Panorama, a Tobago Panorama arranger, multi-talented. We welcome him to make his presentation. I think he deserves another round of applause. I will now ask Mr. Reginald Dumas, former head of the Public Service, to come to the podium to introduce the featured speaker.
Good evening, all. Madam Chairperson, Dr. Rita Pemberton, Mrs. Crystal Washington Tom, representing the Honorable Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Kelvin Charles, Dr. the Honorable, the Presiding Officer of the Tobago House of Assembly, Dr. Denise Soyafat Angus, members of the THA Executive Council. I don't know if there are any here, but if there are, probably not. I'm not going to repeat that. Mrs. Eloise Gonsalves, specially invited guests, other ladies and gentlemen, all of whom are distinguished. I am especially pleased and honored this evening to be introducing our featured speaker, a person whom I have known and liked for many years, and whom I greatly respect. That is the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves. Many of us in the Caribbean know him better as Comrade Ralph. Yes. Prime Minister Gonsalves has a distinguished academic background. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees and a PhD in government from the University of the West Indies, and a law degree from Manchester University in England. He's also a qualified attorney at law who appeared before his country's courts and the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. But such practice did not hamper his growing involvement in politics. And what involvement, ladies and gentlemen? He became leader of a political party in his country, then leader of a party with which the first party had merged. And that merger, called the Unity Labour Party, won the general election on March the 28th, 2001, and has won every single general election since. The Comrade Ralph, and he may well be hearing this for the first time, has therefore just broken Eric Williams' record of a little more than 18 and a half uninterrupted years as Prime Minister of his independent state. So now, after academic success, he has achieved a distinguished political milestone. But he is still at heart the academic. If I said earlier that I greatly respect him, it is in large part because after Williams, he has been preeminent among regional politicians in writing and speaking on a wide variety of issues affecting the Caribbean as a whole, not only his country. He sees the region holistically, not as a scattering of insular solitudes afflicted by a dividing sea. Where global affairs are concerned, he sees the imperative for us to have a clear international voice. In that connection, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has recently been elected to the United Nations Security Council. The smallest country ever to gain membership of that prestigious and powerful body. I'm sure I speak for everyone here this evening when I offer sincere congratulations on this singular achievement. And if my colleagues and I invited him to address us here in Tobago, it is also because, with his all-embracing view of our region and its place in the world, it was he who, years ago, and uniquely among his political peers, made a case for reparative justice for the descendants of the victims of the transatlantic slave trade and of the ethnic cleansing visited on the indigenous people of the region, because they were here before the Africans came, and they suffered immensely at the hands of Europe. And he has continued to make that case. Ladies and gentlemen, I can therefore think of no better person to address us this evening on the topic, the issue of reparations for native genocide and slavery, than Comrade Dr. the Honorable Ralph Everett Gonsalves. Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, whom I now invite to the podium.
Madam Chairperson, thank you very much. My princess. The distinguished leaders of the Assembly in Tobago, Reggie Dumas, members of the clergy, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends and comrades, and the children. I'm very happy to see you, especially the children. I want first of all to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to speak on the subject of reparatory justice for native genocide and enslavement of Africans in the Caribbean. I am happy, very happy to do so. And I was really surprised at the large number of persons who have turned out here to hear this fellow from St. Vincent and the Grenadines talk on this question. I know you have larger questions on your mind of greater immediacy, but I'm very pleased. I want to thank Reggie Dumas for his kind opening, for his kind introduction of me, and of course, my fellow student from the days of Mona. We graduated in 1969, that's 50 years ago. She came in as a little girl. and of course, my dear Taylor Wright, very happy to see you. You know, Reggie, 1969 was not such a bad year for turning out prime ministers. In that year, 3 came out of the class of 69. Bruce Golding, Patrick Manning, and myself. In fact, both Bruce and Patrick campaigned for me to be president of the Guild of Undergraduates. And I made Patrick get tear gas. And for my sins, Bruce Golden saved me from deportation from Jamaica for my political activities. This is how this Caribbean is sweet. I also want to thank Reggie for raising the question of the historic election of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as the youngest, as the smallest country ever, youngest too, to have been elected to the Security Council as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. This was a 10-year campaign. And we were determined to do it right. See, one of the problems with us in the Caribbean, we don't have a sufficient patience and a calm to do certain things. We're so accustomed to instant coffee and instant cocoa and KFC that we forget that sometimes we need to plan things properly, especially if you're in, if you are in a zone where you are seeking to climb the political equivalent of Mount Everest. And we did it very sensibly. I had to convince, of course, the heads in the region. At first, many took it like a joke. But as the evangelicals said, they buy this with Jesus. You do it. And along the way, we became St. Vincent and Grenadines, became the chair, among other things, of the 5th Committee, which deals with the budget and finance and administration at the United Nations. Can you imagine a country of 110,000 people? Or as one American journalist wrote, that we are about, our economy is about the size of the value of the Fontainebleau Hotel in South Florida. And, you know, we became also, we occupied the presidency of ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, one of 3 Caribbean countries ever to do so, Haiti and Jamaica being the others, and the smallest one to have done so. And a lot of UN agencies have had to report to us. A remarkable story. And then we won the election on the 7th of June. It was a contested election between ourselves and another country from the group of Latin America and the Caribbean. We, of the 193 members of the General Assembly, we got 185 votes. They got 6, and there were 2 abstentions. Now, when I began the campaign, Pastor Charles will tell you, the opposition in St. Vincent and the Grenadines said, well, you know, Ralph is a crazy man. It's not the first time that I've been declared insane by the opposition. In fact, on more than one occasion, they advised me to check myself involuntarily at the psychiatric hospital and have the chief psychiatrist, Dr. Debnat, examine me. So I'm accustomed to that sort of a thing. But of course, upon the victory, it took them 48 hours to join in the pride and joy. Success has 1,000 fathers, and failure is an orphan. But it is an absolutely remarkable story. But I didn't know I was going to be Prime Minister again in 2010 to win the election, or in 2015. We mapped it out very carefully. And it was not just a campaign of seeking influence. On the eve of the election, one member of the cabinet, Camilo, who happens to carry my last name, he being my firstborn son, wrote a book called Globalized, Climatized, Stigmatized, in where he elaborated the thesis of small island state exceptionalism, not as a category to be looked upon in some benign manner as special and differential treatment handed by other entities, but as a category in the international political economy which deserves a special attention, which accords us certain rights, and we have certain obligations. And just so as they knew who they were voting for, I wrote a book, about 350 pages, on the political economy of the labor movement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, taking a cue from George Lamin, who advised that if you want to write about the politics of a particular country, begin to view it from the perspective of the labor movement, and then you'll pretty much get it right. So it was also a campaign with ideas. And in the period 2010 to 2019, I made it my business to make sure that we were always writing and publishing. In my case, I made a modest contribution of having 8 books published in the 10-year period of the campaign. So it is, we can do things once we set our mind to do them with a certain rigor. And it is the same thing which we have to do in addressing reparations for native genocide and enslavement of Africans. You know, I listened very carefully to the preacher, the one who gave the prayer. And she spoke about the prophet builder, Nehemiah, who rebuilt the city walls around Jerusalem after it was broken for 112 years. And when he set about doing it, he was mocked. And the mockery turned swiftly to anger as he was succeeding, and the anger to conspiracy. They said, if a fox runs up on the wall, it will fall down, it will break down. And they wanted, after a while, his enemies, and there are lots of them, Sanballat and Tobago of the Ammonites. There are many modern-day ones. You find them on social media, especially. They eat something bad right their stomach, and they write anything they want to write. Well, none of that kind of thing should deter serious people. You don't pay money to go to a show, to go to the sideshow. You want to know as the main event. And too many times we get preoccupied with sideshows and foolishness and don't address the main event. Serious people address main event. And politics is serious business to be discussed by serious people. It's not a branch of the entertainment industry. If you want to be entertained, well, you hire Buju Banton or Marshall Montano. But if you want to discuss serious business, you take serious people, not Boudreaux and Marshall, not serious. They're serious about what they're doing. They're professionals. But it's a serious matter. And too many times, we try to pander and don't speak with sufficient clarity. Fortunately for me, I am now 73 years old, and I have lived far more years than I have remaining left to live. And therefore, I think I have earned the right to speak my mind. And as I always tell the people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if you don't like it when I speak my mind, you can kick my butt at the polls. You might well do me a favor. Because I have a house in the bush. I live up there like a Rasta man, but with internet. So, we have to, and we have to make sure that we plan properly, and we don't get snowed under with learned helplessness or pessimism. I know you have to utilize all the skills that we have. You know, all these teachings are there in the book which we have been taught about, the most popular book in our homes, and the Bible is there. I mean, when you Matthew 25, chapter 25, and we know the Sankey which comes from it, put a little oil in your lamp, keep it burning. That's about the 5 foolish virgins and the 5 wise ones. And you have to put oil in the lamp. You have to plan, just in case the husband come by the door. You have a little oil in your lamp. Keep it burning till the break of day. And then we are given talents. And as we know, the parable of the talents, if you get one and you hide it in the ground, the master will tell you, what wicked and slothful servant. But nowadays, a lot of people don't want to use their talents. And you want things free and easy. Well, no progressive society has ever been built without hard and smart work. You do not build a progressive society with leisure, pleasure, and nice time. I love leisure, pleasure, and nice time, but you have to pay for it. And if you don't work to pay for leisure, pleasure, and nice time, you just want leisure, pleasure, and nice time, what it means, you're going to thief and kill in order to get money to have leisure, pleasure, and nice time. And no serious society has been built on these things. Now, these are truths which we know. But people are afraid to talk them. In fact, even some pastors are afraid to talk them because they mightn't get enough collection. But we have to speak these things. And we have to have optimism. I'm not a Lamentations man. The author of the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah, people misunderstand him. Inside of the book, there's a telling formulation. Morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we need, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness. So, when we come to this subject, we have to bear all of those things in mind as we proceed with this campaign. And we have to have a particular view of history. No. If you think that history is bunk, You shouldn't have anything to do with it. Well, that's the road to dehumanization. History helps to define who we are. If also you have a romanticized view of history, and you want to have a sense of victimhood, and you want to live in history, while other nations are hurtling forward, you would be lost. You wouldn't be going anywhere. We have to learn from history. And we have to utilize that learning and that understanding to come home to ourselves and to prepare ourselves and put a little oil in our lamp, keep it burning, and get all our talents put together and utilize that history in the contemporary circumstances to make the situation better for us, not to desecrate the future, because of all time, only the future is ours not to desecrate. The present is the past, and the past our fathers' mischiefs. So when I'm going to talk to you about reparations, it is about repairing the legacy of underdevelopment, which is a consequence of native genocide and the enslavement of Africans. It's not a question of checking the DNA of the indigenous people to see who was alive then and of African peoples of African descent. No. The societies in which we live are societies in which there is a legacy of underdevelopment. That legacy is linked directly to native genocide and the enslavement of Africans. And it is that legacy of underdevelopment which persists today, which we must address the question of repairing. And those who profited from native genocide and the enslavement of Africans must help us by an appropriate means of recompense and in other ways, as in the CARICOM 10-point plan, which you can talk about, to assist us in repairing that legacy of underdevelopment. And that if they don't want to have the conversation, not a confrontation. There are people who say to me, well, you're talking. You're not going to get anywhere if you don't go and protest. You want me outside number 10 Downing Street with a placard to say reparations? I'm the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I have other instruments rather than making a fool of myself with a placard in front of number 10 Downing Street. So, we have to have a conversation with the British, and with the French in the case of Haiti, and the Dutch in the case of Suriname. I'm talking about the Caribbean countries, the CARICOM countries. And if that is not, that conversation yields nothing tangible, if there's a breakdown, well then, we have to use legal and political instruments on an ongoing basis. And one legal path forward is to bring a case to the International Court of Justice within the framework of certain conventions, and more particularly the Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which addresses the question of the redress of the legacy of underdevelopment occasioned or caused by native genocide and the enslavement of Africans. And of course, there is political pressure which could be brought to resolutions of the United Nations, other forms of work which we can do through specialized agencies of the United Nations and other international bodies which we are members. And in this decade, the decade of for persons of African descent, 5 years have gone, that we have to accelerate the program to bring about a claim, a complaint to the International Court of Justice if serious discussions don't bear fruit. And we have been talking about it, and we have dropped the ball. And I don't intend for this year to be out, coming up. As I was telling Reggie, I want to raise the issue sharply again at the intersessional meeting in February, and I take over the chairmanship in July and next year, and it's one of the matters that I will address, God willing. So, I've written a book, a small book, called The Case for Caribbean Reparatory Justice. I will leave a couple copies, plus some other things, which we have written over the last few years. I want to speak generally about what has happened across the Caribbean, but I also want to speak specifically about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Every student knows that 20 million pounds were given in compensation to the slave owners for the slaves in the Caribbean. Nothing was given to the slaves themselves. And underdevelopment followed emancipation, as in fact there was during slavery. And there are international obligations to repair. And that repairing has not been done. At least if any has been done, it hasn't been done sufficiently. And that is the basis upon which we'll be proceeding. And in the case of native genocide, look, the Europeans simply wipe out the indigenous population. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they met about 10,000 Kalinago and Garifuna in 1763. Incidentally, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, Dominica, and Tobago was ceded in 1763 at the same time to the British after the 7 Years' War, the Treaty of Paris between Britain and France. The indigenous people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines didn't have anything to do with that. They were fighting, whereas there was an independent country ruled by the Kalinago and the Garifuna. And the British came. And it took them nearly 40 years, from 1763 to 1800, to subdue the Kalinago and the Garifuna. It is the only country in the entire Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where the people, the indigenous people, resisted the establishment of a colonial state and the establishment of slavery among themselves with them. a lot of history books in the region don't have that, you know. They had to ambush our leader, Chief Joseph Chatoyer, and killed him in 1795. And then they began a large-scale genocide. Killed a lot of them. Then they took 5,000 plus and put them in an island offshore called Baliso. There's no water, no food. And no amenities. Half of them died within 6 months. And the other half, they transported them forcibly to the Bay of Honduras and Roatan Island. And from where they went to Nicaragua, they went to Honduras, they went to Belize, and they went to Guatemala. In fact, the people, when they come, every year they come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the descendants of the Garifuna. And they kiss the ground when they come, because for them it's a place called Yuremin, Yuremein. That is their ancestral homeland. It's interesting that Chatoyer, who is a national hero in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, my government proclaimed him so in 2002. He's our only national hero thus far. But in Honduras, Chatoyer, who is Chatoyer, is a national hero there, though he never set foot in Honduras. No, you read in the book, the history book, the colonial ones, that the Caribs were fierce and warlike, and how they eat people. Cannibals. Why were they fierce? Well, if you leave England and you come down and you sign a document in Paris and you come and take my land, I will fight you. It's a natural thing. And when the British sought to do a treaty with them along the lines of the 1738 treaty, which the British had with the Maroons in Jamaica, the Kalinago and the Garifuna told them, no, you're not going to give us just a small piece of land. And we're satisfied with that. This is our land. And they fought to the death. And the spirit of resistance has been in our country for a long time. Only that over the years, people tried to subdue it. But new leadership, including Comrade Ralph, and I admit that I was born with a rebel seed, and I accept what Christ says to me, be not afraid, and I'm not afraid of anybody. That we bring that history to the fore. Not to hate anybody, you know. Not to malice anybody. Because we are friends of all and we strive for a better world. We're not better than anybody and nobody better than us. It's a simple elementary proposition. And that's why we speak in our country, and my government speaks, and I speak, of the reclamation of independence in 1979. Because we were independent before. Now, this book documents the amount of land which the British took, and the value for the land then and the value for the land now. Because there's objective work as to what are the values today. For instance, for the question of slavery, the compensation given for slaves. The University College of London, Professor Draper, They have calculated that you have to use a factor of 839 to get today's values. So there's empirical work which has been done, and which could tell you what should be the values. But those values in respect of the land, what is taken, and the killing of the number of the indigenous people, and what was paid in relation to the slave masters, those are not the numbers that you have to start with. That's not the research you have to do. You do the research there because that will give you the extent to which they had profited immediately. What you have to do to make a proper legal complaint, you have to look at what are the consequences, what is the composite legacy of underdevelopment, which is linked directly native genocide and African slavery. And you can go about everywhere and you can see it. But we have to do the work. We have to do the detailed quantification. And a lot of man talking, a lot of man and woman talking, but not a lot of man and woman walking. And that's an area in which we have to do serious work, and what the University of the West Indies and other people have to help us with. And that's what also, in terms of the legal work, or the legal scholars in our region have to help us with. But we have a roadmap, and I'm giving you the idea of the roadmap. I know there are some persons who would be saying, but Ralph, nah, you can't really seriously expect that there would be any requisite for money for the legacy of underdevelopment. But interestingly, the inside of Britain itself, there are people who are making the case. You can go online and find a speech delivered by the Archbishop, former Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams. A sermon delivered at Westminster Abbey in London on the 27th of May 2007 to mark the bicentennial of the abolition of the slave trade. And this is what Archbishop Williams says. We who are the heirs of the slave owning and slave trading nations of the past have to face the fact that our historic prosperity was built in large part on this atrocity. Those who are the heirs of the communities ravaged by the slave trade know very well that much of their present suffering and struggling is the result of centuries of abuse. Slavery is not a regional problem in the human world. It is hideously persistent in our nations and cultures. But today, it is for us to face our history. The Atlantic trade was our contribution to this universal sinfulness. Well, now, as a man of the cloth, those who want to seek forgiveness for their sins, do so. But we want something a little more than the seeking forgiveness that is good for the soul, their soul. But we want something for what he rightly said, that much of their present suffering and struggling is the result of centuries of abuse. Now, I have here, a lot of work has been done. I have in my hand a document study which was done called the Legal Mechanisms for the Redress of Slavery. I had gotten a law firm to help us with this. And there's a draft notice of a formal complaint to be made on the subject. A lot more work still needs to be done. Well, Frondell Stewart, former Prime Minister, had written a letter to David Cameron to begin the conversation. And Cameron wrote back and said that this is not a question of, we must look at the past. We must look forward to the future. The past is the past. And I agree with that. But I want to look forward to the future with you helping me to repair it. Repair the present so I can have a better future. You can't just tell me to forget it in the abstract. Because what you think is the past is still present, and which is affecting the future, which of all time is the only time we could desecrate. And in 2006, St. Vincent and the Grenadines co-sponsored a landmark resolution at the United Nations General Assembly. We co-sponsored on behalf of CARICOM, together with another 130 states. And we recognize that the legacy of slavery is at the heart of the situations of profound social and economic inequality, which continue to affect people of African descent today. And further emphasizing in particular the importance of the provision of effective remedies, recourse, redress, and compensatory and other measures at the national, regional, and international levels aimed at countering the continued impact of slavery and the slave trade. And there are a series of resolutions of the United Nations. And then, of course, there is the duty to address the consequences of native genocide and slavery under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And the first obligation for countries like the United Kingdom is under Article 2.1 of this convention, and you can look it up. It's a 1966 convention. It's called CERD, C-E-R-D, Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And the first obligation under Article 2.1 is to pursue by all appropriate means a policy of eliminating racial discrimination, including through the amendment of policies which have the effect of creating or perpetuating racial discrimination wherever it exists. It's not a narrow view of racial discrimination. It addresses to the effect of it. That is included in the definition when you read the convention carefully. And the second obligation is pursuant of Article 2.2 of the CERD to take concrete and special measures to ensure the adequate development and protection of certain racial groups or individuals belonging to them for the purpose of guaranteeing them the full and equal enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. So there is existing international law which we can go to. We are signatories to this convention. Trinidad and Tobago is signatory, Southern Caribbean, several CARICOM countries. In the same way, we are also signatories to the international, to the statute setting up the International Court of Justice, which is the body to which we have to go. Because we continue to be, the point I'm making, we continue to be victims of the consequences of native genocide and African slavery. Look, if I just take you with something, when the British carried out genocide against the indigenous people. And by the way, you might hear the term Garifuna. What it means is the mixing between the Africans and the indigenous Kalinago. Slavery didn't start in St. Vincent and Grenadines until 1764, you know. We had the shortest period of slavery in this Caribbean, you know. St. Vincent and Grenadines, you see it put down there. It's not an easy place, you know. I tell you, we fought for 40 years before they could establish a colonial state proper. And we had the shortest period of slavery. We don't carry many chips on our shoulders, you know. And people come to St. Vincent and they say, boy, Vincent, you're so nice. We're very nice and we're easy because we don't look out to fight anybody. We don't have enemies and so on and so forth. I remember telling a judge once, was behaving in a particular way when I used to practice law. And it was very insulting to people at the bar and witnesses and everybody. Occasionally you find judges like that. And one day I decided to go and see him. I said, Judge, I think I should talk to you. The way you speaking to people and so on, and disrespecting people. I said, we are a strange people, you know. One morning you will get up. And all of a sudden, people pull in the rope. And he said, no. I said, okay. And just as I predicted, one day out of the blue, it's as though there's some force which brought everybody together and started pulling the rope on him. He called me to complain. I told him. I say, you see, as a boy from the country, a lot of people mistakenly from the tongue think it's long rope does hang cattle. It's short rope. And you pull in the rope. You ever see long rope? You kill hang cattle since you're born? No. Short rope. So, so we are a people who we don't carry these chips on our shoulders, but we believe in. Okay. We are in. We believe seriously in justice, and we resist when there is injustice. He came to tell me I must speak more to the camera, but because he's such a distinguished elder, I have to talk to the elder. I have to talk to the elder. I have to talk to the elder. You know, I have to pay respect to the elder. So this is essentially the framework for the case, and how we want to proceed with it. The 10-point plan for CARICOM. In summary, 1, full formal state apology for involvement in this transatlantic slave trade and slavery. 2, facilitation and assistance of and support for welcome return and resettlement of the descendants of enslaved Africans. And this is a recommendation which was made in the Durban Declaration and Program of Action and subsequently endorsed by the United Nations General Assembly in a resolution in 2002. That is for persons who want to go back to resettle in Africa. And there's some who want to do so. By the way, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I believe that my country is the only one that doesn't have any requirement for a visa for Ethiopians. In fact, I did a visa abolition agreement in 2005. So our nationals can go to Ethiopia without a visa, and they can come to Ethiopia. Once you have the money to buy the ticket, you can go to Ethiopia. So there's no impediment from the standpoint of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Then, thirdly, an Indigenous Peoples Development Plan to target through development aid and programmatic interventions the inequality and marginalization experienced by Indigenous communities in the Caribbean. I'll tell you this, Carib country, as they call it, after the British had basically wiped out the Kalinago and Garifuna nation. And it's interesting, part of the fierceness is this. A lot of the Africans who came before slavery in St. Vincent and the Grenadines came from Barbados. As you know, there's no mountain in Barbados to hide in. Not a lot of bush you have to hide. People ran away, slaves ran away from Barbados and went to St. Vincent. And clearly, if you leave slavery there, you're going to allow anybody to come and establish it in St. Vincent. You will fight, which is what happened. And there was, in the 1670s, a slave ship wrecked off St. Vincent, and the slaves, a large number of them, swam ashore and went to St. Vincent. And they mated with the Kalinago. And they became very strong fighters, and they were tremendous guerrilla fighters because, as I say, they kept the might of the British Empire at bay for nearly 40 years. It's a remarkable achievement, you know. But when they had carried out their genocide, and most of the people who got killed were strong young men, and the small number which remained on an inhospitable 238 acres. Imagine owning in St. Vincent and the Grenadines 90-something thousand acres, 96,000 acres of land. And all you end up with is 238 in the most inhospitable part of St. Vincent. And you're trying to switch off the thing. Give me a little problem. Give me a little problem. That's okay. But see how the colonialists distort things. Well, they put them in this inhospitable part of the country. No proper roads, there's nothing up there. Worst, most marginal piece of land. You have old people and you have a number of young women. Well, human beings are animals, we are not plants. We have to reproduce through activity between man and woman. A simple biological fact. So if you didn't have enough men up there, the women will find men to come up into that area. And then they begin to say, you heard it, Carib woman loose. Entirely false. There wasn't prostitution. You had prostitutions on the streets of London and in Manchester and Liverpool. You didn't have it in Carib country in St. Vincent. The loose women over there, not by us. But they painted that picture. And it's the poorest part of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's since the rise of the social democratic state. Since I came to office, that a secondary school was built in that part of the country. Since I came to office, an ambulance service was put in that part of the country. You hear what I'm telling you? since I come to office, that there's widespread pipe-borne water in their homes. I'm talking about, and I came to office at the beginning of the 21st century, you know. To drive to go up to what is called Caribbean country, you have to drive on in the rough river of what is called a dry river, more than 2 football fields wide, because of the eruptions of the volcano in 1812 and 1902. And there's a river which comes, a stream which comes down, and you don't know what's happening in the mountain, and you'll be crossing with your vehicle, and all you do, you get washed and go see. I built a bridge there, you know. Well, when I say I was going to build a bridge across the Rabuka, well, they said, no, definitely, you know, that Ralph crazy. This is a time for the mental hospital. This is an occasion. She married a madman. She leave good family and come to St. Vincent, go marry a crazy man. You ever hear a thing like that? Anyway, I'm talking about the underdevelopment. And there's still tremendous work which is required to be done. These were a proud and independent people. Look, I will read. There's a fellow, John Anderson, who was a stipendiary magistrate. He wrote a journal in 1836 in St. Vincent. He was there. He lived actually in the Great House in Connery, going up by the estate, up at the place called Yard. That's up there where they lived. This is what he said about the defeated Kalinago Garifuna nation. It is certainly a surprising fact that so insignificant a body as the Caribs, remember this is a British public servant, so insignificant a body as the Caribs amounted to when finally transported to the island of Raton in the Bay of Honduras in March 1797, should for 2 years have baffled the energies of Great Britain. Well, he's talking about the 2 years between 1795 and 1797. But it was happening since 1764. It speaks little for the military skill of the generals employed by the British, even allowing that the localities of the Isle are favorable to guerrilla warfare. With the extinction as a warlike nation, the people are there living in peace, you know. They say they're warlike. You leave England and take my land, you must turn me into a beast. People in Tobago fight over 100 square foot of land boundary between you and your neighbor. And there's a Tobago man. Much less a man come from England and take all your land. And when you beg somebody, when you say, well, listen, if the man take your land, you take it to the High Court. You say, High Court what? You want to chop up the man with a cutlass? 100 square foot of land in Tobago. But you want to take 96,000 acres in St. Vincent for yourself. The few Caribs, with their extinction as a warlike nation, every energy seems to have expired. The few Caribs who are allowed to exist in the northern quarter, which is designated by their name, are a wretched remnant, weak in body as in mind, with an innate abhorrence of labor, looking upon idleness as the summum bonum, that's the highest good of life. They are still divided into yellow and black Caribs. The latter sprung from the Aborigines and Negro slaves. Being passionately fond of spirits, the planters occasionally succeed in rousing them from their torpid state of temptation by the temptation of rum, when they will assist in shipping off the sugars from estates. In every other respect, they are useless to themselves or others. But it's to run the place by themselves. They were fantastic seamen. They traveled all about. They had already invented the sail. You think you can leave the Orinoco and come up the road so easy on a rowboat? You think you could row from St. Vincent to St. Kitts? But you see what happened to them by the time that they were defeated. And what you're having in St. Vincent, in that part, it's the area which is the most undeveloped area of St. Vincent still. Poverty is greatest in that area. It has to be repaired. Thus reparations. And the same thing applies to the issue relating to the legacy of underdevelopment for enslaved Africans. We go on to the other CARICOM 10-point. Support for the establishment and operation of cultural and civic educational and training institutions in the Caribbean. Concrete practical measures to assist Caribbean states and remedy the legacy of slavery in the fields of public health and education. You know, research has been done. And Hilary Bechtel's reports on that in his book on Britain's Black Death. You know, we in the Caribbean, we suffer a lot from diabetes and hypertension. But you go in West Africa, you don't have that. You go to Mississippi, you find it. If you're growing up for generations, eating plenty salt pork, some low-grade pork and saltfish, and you have to work all the hours you're working, from sunrise to sunset. It develops. And the research shows that this is connected to the nature of the diet that people had during the period of slavery. Then, targeted development aid and economic, institutional, and technical assistance to help the descendants of slavery and also the indigenous people. And debt cancellation and monetary compensation and targeted market access. Now, all these are the 10 points which we have accepted in CARICOM broadly as the basis. So there's a compelling case for repairing. We need to do more detailed work in respect of the absence by the Europeans or limitations of any policies which they had brought into being up to the time of the Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination and subsequently. And to provide that data, which is not hard to find, so that we can have a proper conversation on this 10-point plan, including appropriate recompense for the legacy, to repair the legacy of native genocide and African slavery. Now, when this is being done, while this is being done. We mustn't sit on our laurels. I was indicating to Reggie Dumas, who incidentally, I don't know if you know how lucky you are to have a man like Reggie Dumas living among you. We are accustomed to meeting individuals who seek in political power. We're not often dealing with elders who, even when he may be wrong in his judgment, because he's a human being, that he's a patriot, he's a nationalist, and he loves his people and wants to bring to bear selflessly the benefit of his knowledge and experience to help to provide a guide for the improvement of our community. To have such an elder is a blessing. Eh? Now, while we are doing this, and this is a long and hard struggle, we have to be doing other things too. We have to join ourselves properly with Africa. Now, I don't know if you know this. I am the only head of government outside of Africa who attended an African university. I went to Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. I wrote a PhD thesis on the political economy of the labor movement in Uganda, from colonialism to Amin. And in the next 40 years, Africa's population is now 1.3 billion in the 54 states of Africa. 55 if you put Western Sahara, which is incorporated currently into Morocco. And they have their discussions going. They have a forum for that at the United Nations. In 40 years' time, it is predicted, extrapolated, forecast that Africa will have about 1/2 of all the persons in the world below the age of 25 years. And it's a fact of life that young people breed more than old people. No. We are animals, but a special kind of animal. I'll be dead and gone, but remember I tell you this. Everybody is talking about the American century and the Chinese century. Beyond 2050, 2060, watch out for the African century. Because between Africa and Latin America, they're going to make the whole world brown. You hear what I'm telling you? African blood is going to be running in the veins of people all over the world on an extensive scale. Some people may seek to dominate with nuclear weapons and other things. Biology is an interesting thing. I want you to reflect on it and read on it. It's an area where there is very little discussion. Already you see it's happening. The big megastars are getting browner and blacker, and they're becoming symbols of beauty in a way that was not the case before. And there's a higher premium. on the darker skin. And it will happen more and more. I'm not making a racial point. I'm making a point as to what is happening because the rest of the world is aging, including our Caribbean. The population in St. Vincent and Grenadines, the highest, the fastest growing segment of the population is the over 60. But the population is still young. Same thing is happening in Trinidad and Tobago and all throughout the Caribbean. In Africa, the population is very young. China is getting old. America, Europe. Now, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, National Hero of Jamaica, had once addressed the question of the unity of Africans all over the world. Garvey had presided over the most widespread political movement of persons of African descent in the Western world. People think the civil rights movement, no. Garvey. Garveyism, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. The history which they try to hide from our people. No. When Garvey wrote and spoke, most of Africa and in the Caribbean were colonies. We're now independent. There are 54 independent states in Africa. The shortest distance between Africa and the New World is between Dakar in Senegal and Brazil. Don't know if you know this. Brazil, which has a population of 220 million people, 110 million are of African descent. The only place in Africa where you have a larger population of persons, Africans or African descent, is Nigeria. But Ethiopia is catching up fast. They're going past 100 million. And Egypt is doing quite well too in that regard. There's an association of Caribbean states consisting of 25 states, 24 of which washed by the Caribbean Sea, amounting to about 240 million people. One of those 25 is El Salvador, which is a Pacific country in the sense it's washed by the Pacific Ocean, not the Caribbean, but because it's there in Central America, surrounded by all the other countries in Central America washed by the Caribbean Sea. You can't really leave them alone. So we put the Caribbean wide, which would include Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and of course all the Central American ones, Costa Rica, Panama, Honduras, Nicaragua, Belize, the whole lot of them. Plus ours in the islands, we are about 240 million all told. Mexico is 120 of them. Then we have between North America and Europe about 70 million persons who are of African descent. You're talking about 1.7, 1.8 billion people. Tremendous resources. Two of them in our part of the world, Brazil and Mexico, are in the G20. South Africa is in the G20. South Africa is in BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. I've been advocating the establishment of an ABCD commission, a permanent commission Africa, Brazil, the Caribbean, and the diaspora of Africans. I put the proposal to CARICOM. They have accepted. I'm the chair of a prime ministerial subcommittee. Barbados and Suriname are also there with me. And I have to report to this. I have to report to the intersessional meeting. This is a visionary idea. It's connected to what I'm talking about repairing. Because we can't just look for the conversation alone. We have to use our instruments of sovereignty and independence to address more efficaciously, more capably, our external environment within our own interest, which has always been the defining character of foreign policy, to use your instruments of sovereignty and independence to come to terms with the external environment. This is another one which requires a patience and a calm. But you and I know that sun brightens stone and all the river burns. We have to begin to think and work towards these things. It's not going to be easy. We have to refashion our thought processes. We have to be original in how we are going forward. We have to prepare. We have to put a little oil in our lamp. And we got to keep it burning till the break of day. And we can't hide our talents. And we have to be optimistic. Can't be in any way at all having lamentations. You know, I don't want to get involved in your internal politics, and I'm not going to be out of place. But Trinidad and Tobago has a very special role to play in the leadership of the integration movement and in the large idea of the ABCD Commission and the fight for reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of Africans. Thank you very much.